Hi, welcome. This is a reading of Walking a Rainbow, story of what happened when I, Michael Shearer, and my son Kez, who was 9, walked the Camino de Santiago. This is chapter 22, which is called Meseta. Eugenio joined the three of us as we walked through the almost empty streets. We bought some sticky cakes for breakfast. Carrion has the feel of a pioneer town, the last chance saloon. Beyond Carrion is hell. I suspect that Dante is right, and the only way to heaven is through hell. Most mystics seem to believe something of the kind. There had been much anxious talk of the flat plain of the Meseta among pilgrims along the way. We knew of its reputation, the exposed furnace of Castile. The landscape becomes metaphysical, a world of basic elemental categories: earth, sky, heat. No water. A diminution of the self unaccommodated, a poor, bare, forked thing creeping across Spain's equivalent of the heath. A cruel, shadeless land where a straight path stretches to a featureless horizon all day, day after day. Here a mind could turn in upon itself. No wonder Eugenio had joined us. The four of us crossed the Rio Carrion together and plodded down a long, dreary minor road. The small fields, looking like allotments, had pools of stagnant, scummy irrigation water. We were plagued with clouds of little black midges and the occasional mosquito whining like a stuka. Kez tied his handkerchief around his mouth, and we all followed suit. The road became an apparently endless track, like a straight, flat furrow through a bare and horizontal plain. No more fields. The scene was one huge field. Even my sketch map was almost devoid of features. It showed an encina marked a few kilometres ahead. I asked Claudio what it was. "It means oak. It's a tree." The path had bulky nodules of rounded stones half buried in the ground, some edged green with moss or lichen. They were all shades of dull purple and pale blood, and shaped like fossilized kidneys and livers of extinct monsters. It was impossible to tread on a flat surface, and this hurt the muscles of the feet. Conversation flattened with the landscape. Cloudless powder blue above, a level sea of golden stubble below. Not much else. The savage heat beat the words out of us. There was no sound save for the clunk of my staff on the stones. We eventually elected to walk parallel to the path through the dusty, withered stubble. As we walked, vast crowds of grasshoppers rose from the earth, each in a long jumping glide, spreading their wings to reveal patches of maroon before plumping heavily into the ground in a tiny spray of dust. It was like walking through a colourful plague of locusts. Claudio collected spearmint and watermint from in and around the ditches by the path. We passed a sign for a village called Bastillo del Paramo. To our right, small breasts of my lover, I supposed. Claudio taught me a new Spanish word, uno muermo. The same again and again, something excruciatingly boring. He also translated the name of the next village, Calzadilla de la Cuesta, which was somewhere ahead over the horizon. Small path of the boiled. Claudio? Yes, Michael? While we are talking about Spanish, do you think you could teach me a Spanish sentence? Just one? I think so. What is the sentence? I want to be able to say, your beautiful brown eyes fill me with passionate desire. Nothing personal, of course. His rotting teeth appeared in his black beard. And what will you say after this sentence? I thought I'd leave that to intuition and body language. The sentence you want is, let me see, tus hermosos ojos negros me llenan de deseo y pasión. I tried it. Claudio was very critical of my pasión. There is not enough passion in your pasión. It is not brave. Not enough oomph. What is oomph? I jerked my right forearm up into the air. Ah yes, more oomph. I practiced on the grasshoppers bravely. We rested briefly beneath the lonely oak. It was a poor specimen, a stunted and scrappy affair, maybe 8 feet high, but it was all there was, with a crowd of cheerful pilgrims laying beneath. We joined them in the poor shade, a little light-headed with the unrelenting heat, amid thousands of flies. Whatever the computation actually is, this lone tree felt like the midpoint of the walk, a marker, the stumpy axis of our world. Kes sat at the edge of the shade with his staff held out into the sun. What exactly are you doing, Kes? Fishing. What for? Stones. Why stones? It's all there is. Good, good. Any luck? Not yet. Well, don't give up. I won't. We emerged into an epiphany of heat to be grilled in the sun. The landscape had become empty of people, indeed of life. Even the birds had been incinerated off the face of the earth, devoured by the sun. Thoughts were burnt away, the past cauterized. Blanked by the fiery furnace, we could become otherwise now. When the hamlet of Calzadilla, maybe 24 houses, appeared ahead, it looked as if its roofs were metal melted by the heat. It glistered in the raw sun. Its few concrete streets were deserted, as if cleared by a death ray. We filled our water bottles from a tap sticking out of the side of a building. In the bar was Bluto, on the telephone to Burgos, arranging to be picked up. The lumpy path had proved to be the last straw for his tormented feet. They must have baked in their own sweat in his heavy boots. He was resigned, but determined to try again next year. He wished us luck, hobbled into the dining room, and sat down to a meal big enough for 3. Just beyond Calzadilla, we were back on the tarmac. A van stopped just ahead of us, and the driver beckoned. He had a plastic tub full of melting ice and cans of tonic and orange. He presented each of us with a refreshing drink. About a mile further on, a troop of cyclists stopped by us and offered us water from a bottle wrapped in a wet sock. As they cheerfully departed, we could see a figure pushing a cart along the road behind us. We sat by the roadside to let Serge and his dog catch us up. Ledigos is a forlorn hamlet, mostly 2-story adobe houses looking as if they were made of chewed cardboard, and a few dirt or concrete streets. We were directed to the Tele Club as the refuge. This stood back from the road like a brick shoebox. All the windows had iron grills. Plain brick entrance porch in the centre with a door at each side. 2 rooms. To the right, a barren bar apparently filled with bored and bitter anarchists, and to the left, the old schoolroom now left for pilgrims. It was bare and filthy, save for rickety desks around the walls and a voting booth, like an impoverished confessional, in one corner. Several windows were broken, and the floor was covered with scraps of burnt paper. There was no water, no lights either for that matter, nor toilet. The drinkers went in the landscape. I brewed up a cup of tea to cheer us up, while Serge brushed his teeth with a tube of foot cream. While the kettle boiled, I found a broom and moved the dirt around a bit, then laid some sheets of cardboard found outside and stretched our sleeping bags on them. We sat around chatting till dark. Claudio talked of astrology. It is not a subject or a system of prediction. It is a way of life which lives in the grain of the forces of reality. And what is the purpose of the astrological life, Claudio? His shoulders lifted in the barest of shrugs. The same as every other type of life. The purpose of life is the death. A person must destroy themselves. He looked despairingly gloomy. Well, yes, I responded, but these things reflect each other, produce each other. An obsession with destroying the self emphasizes it. It's just a sneaky form of egotism. When Claudio began to prepare his rice, Serge produced a bag of potatoes and announced that he would cook a meal for me and Kez. I gave him the stove and showed him how to work it. I lit some candles while he cooked. He boiled the potatoes whole, and when the mess reservoir ran dry, they still weren't done. Several refills later, and they still weren't cooked, and I'd run out of fuel. The dinner of half-cooked, just warm potatoes, sardines and mussels, all mixed in, was the most disgusting meal I've ever eaten. Even Kez had trouble eating it. The dog refused it. We washed it down with liberal quantities of harsh red wine. Claudio and Eugenio had rice, smelling sweetly of mint. I retired to my bed, my stomach heavy and queasy with indigestible tubers. I began to feel ill and fluffy-headed. From the floor I watched Serge take out his guitar, tune it in the flickering candlelight, and play a mournful blues. Kez sat at his feet, transfixed. They passed a joint back and forth. I felt too sick to be concerned. The dog slept in the voting booth. Eugenio snored like a sick outboard motor throughout the night. I slept badly on the hard floor. I went out at dawn to vomit. I took a walk around the sleeping village. It was chilly, though the sun blazed low in the fresh, pure blue sky. It bathed the world in a cold light like incredibly diluted mountain water. The village cats ambled sleepily about, warily confirming terrestrial rites. Plants stirred stiffly in slow response to their ruler. Kez got up soon after, looking very pale. I packed with my head blurry and full of cotton wool. With no fuel left, I had to wait for Claudio to get up to use his stove for some tea. The Mars bar in my pack had melted in yesterday's heat. "No problem," said Kes, and he scraped it into a bowl, put it on Claudio's stove, heated it up till it melted to a thick liquid, and ate it with a spoon. Then he went even paler, became very quiet, and sat in a corner. Kes and I left ahead of the others. We were in poor shape, and I knew we would be even slower than usual. The rest would surely swiftly catch us up. The first hamlet, Terradillos, was scarcely more than a farmyard with a church. Chickens scrambled about its dirt street. The few further hamlets were much the same, perhaps smaller. All road to the next town, a terrible road. The brilliance of the fiercely white sky hurt the eyes. At the horizon the dazzling sky merged with an earth as white as flour. We walked in the midst of a glaring whiteout, with a grey strip of tarmac down its middle, and in the distance short lines of poplars like dark green toy trains apparently floating in the air. I periodically paused to be sick, even when there was nothing left to come up. Walking in such heat, when you can't even keep water down, is not funny. I began to dehydrate. Kes looked weak, but wasn't sick. I plugged on in a mental haze. We reached Sargun after crossing a railway line. It's a very odd place. I can't imagine anyone voluntarily living there. It's a place to be banished to, somewhere perpetually under siege, zapped with heat in summer, exposed and cold in winter, slapped down in the middle of a bleak plateau like a motley of second-hand condiments in the centre of a huge table. The feel of the place is run down and forgotten. Walls peel, brick cracks and crumbles. The main fountain had water that smelt of bad eggs, as if the town itself had gone off. My raw and empty stomach heaved with the stink of it. Yet solid brick towers marked a clutch of impressive churches, substantial affairs with more than a hint of the military strength of Romanesque, 4 square and stolid like massive dovecotes. To the east of each of these towers were blind apses, 2 or more stories of bricked-in windows to create inside a dark defence from the heat. Sargun has the feel of a town held like a fort against the surrounding elements. It's beyond the boundary of the safe, out in bandit territory where wolves might get you and the sun bleach your bones. A place where your church is a bastion, a retreat built to shrink perspectives amid a limitless surrounding space and instill a little precarious confidence. I should imagine it felt much like Sargun within the stockades of the US cavalry deep in Indian country. Sargun shouldn't really be here. The gritted wind has worn and grooved these embattled red brick churches as if they were butts in a desert. We walked through the town. I bought some meths for the stove, over the bridge and down another straight gruelling road. This became a stony track. Even my sketch map had little marked on it except the single black line of the path from the bottom of the page to the top. The mind had nowhere to go here. Dislocated with dehydration and fever, I sweated along grimly. Kes had tucked his handkerchief under the back of his hat to keep the sun off his neck. He walked steadily, head bowed, hands gripping the straps of his rucksack. We didn't talk much. By the time I reached Berthianos, consciousness was a thin thread of a thing from which I hung. I was a blunt, willful spike stumping along. I'd forgotten why. I'd been walking with someone, but I couldn't remember who. I felt weak and my head burned. At the entrance to the village was a stone fountain. I sipped its warm water and the liquid stayed down. I let the water run for a while till it cooled a bit and splashed it over my face. Then I eased myself wearily to the ground. My pounding head drooped and my eyes closed. The world seemed to roar as if I sat by a constant crashing waterfall. "You all right, Dad?" said a voice, and a mug of water appeared in my hands. I sipped some more. I sat there for some time while the world gradually rearranged itself around me. Someone had taken the mug away. Much time passed. Kez appeared coming down the main dirt street. He had found the refuge. I rose shakily and he led me to it. It was a large rectangular block of a building, 2 stories, its red brick turned white in the sun's glare. Through a splintered door beneath a round arch, the cobbled ground floor was filled with debris like a building site. A stark concrete staircase hung in the space. Upstairs were bare wooden floorboards and many bleak, dirty rooms. One had a grubby horsehair mattress on the floor. I sank onto it and into an instant deep sleep. When I awoke, my head had cleared. Kez was asleep in his sleeping bag nearby, fully clothed. I went out for a walk. It was early evening. A shepherd was herding his sheep down the main street. A soft russet light bathed the church beneath a beautiful azure sky and lilac clouds. I watched the sunset. The azure deepened, first to indigo and then slowly to black, while the yellow of the departing sun on the horizon mellowed to a suffusion of amber, then red, then rosé, then violet. Stars appeared in the black like a blessing.